Now, if you're looking for a setup video, then I recommend you just go ahead and skip this because there's so many other videos on how to set this thing up that you can simply go and watch those. But if you want to know the truth about this unit and what a professional mix engineer who's been working in the industry for over 18 years thinks about it, then stay because this video is for you. Now, firstly, I actually do believe that IK Multimedia has made a fantastic product, but I also understand that this product is for a specific type of person. And for me, that is the home studio or the project studio, but not the professional mixing studio music environment. For those kind of people, I still highly recommend that you actually go for something like the Nova, or something along those lines, which obviously costs way more. We're talking $5 grand, and if you want like a 5.1 or an Atmos setup of that, then you're talking 12 grand. That's a lot of money. But for someone who's got a home studio, I actually reckon that this thing would be perfect for you. Now, for myself, I mix on the Amphion 218s, and my conversion that I'm using is a Lynx Aurora N. Personally, I think it's great because it's clean. It's not really adding too much to the sound, but it's just giving me a pure tone. Now, the first thing I tested is I plugged my speakers into the unit and checked how things sounded and measured. And then I plugged my speakers directly into my interface and checked how things sounded and how things measured. And I can say that the actual pass-through of this unit, whilst it's bypassed, is actually quite pure. I didn't notice a noticeable difference or see a noticeable difference when comparing the two. So, thumbs up for that. Now, secondly, when I did engage the room correction, the first thing I noticed was that the low end did come forward. Now, I do have to be transparent. This isn't the typical home studio because my room does have some good treatment as it is. Now, a word about acoustic treatment. This unit is unable to resolve issues that you have within your RT60 decay response. Now, what is your RT60 decay response? Essentially, when a sound wave plays, or when you hear a sound wave, there's the immediate transient, which is what the room measurement is picking up. That's what you see on the EQ graph. But after that sound is first initiated, there's then what you call the decay. If you know a little bit about synthesis, you can think about the attack versus the release. So the room correction EQ, it shows the attack, but the release is arguably much more important because when that note first triggers, there's then the reverberation of that sound which happens afterwards. So for example, the difference between t and t. Now, as you can imagine, you may see on a frequency graph that everything is leveled and everything is balanced. But if you've got a lot of decay, a lot of reverb, a lot of boominess, for example, when you hit a bass note and you're like, this bass note's fine, this bass note's fine, this bass note's fine, then you hit this one and it's like, woo, and it's really rumbling. That isn't just a boost at that frequency, but your room is actually resonating at that frequency, which is making that sound last longer within your room. Now, no matter how much corrective EQ you apply, it will never resolve that issue. That issue can only be resolved by adding bass trapping and acoustic treatment into your environment. So firstly, we have to understand what this unit is and what this unit isn't. Now, providing you have some basic form of bass trapping, then this unit does do a fairly good job actually at correcting the frequency response within your room. As I said, it did bring the low end forward, but there was one major issue that I did actually notice, and at fear of counseling myself before I've even got my YouTube channel up and running and no one's sending me gear again, I do have to be honest, and my channel has to be an honest channel. Latency when producing is a massive issue for me. Now, if you're a mix engineer, the latency isn't an issue because you're not really playing things in and recording things in. But if you're a tracking engineer or you're a music producer, then when you're playing in drums or when you're playing in pianos, latency is your worst enemy. And I've done so much to avoid latency. Like even for myself, I used to have these amazing speakers by Ex Machina, these Pulsars, incredible speakers, probably the best speakers I've ever heard. But due to their internal DSP, they actually added latency. And for that reason, I had to sell them. And I went with the Amphion 218s, which have no latency whatsoever because there's no DSP whatsoever. It's just the sound going to the speakers and coming out immediate, which is exactly how I love it. But if you're producing, latency is a massive issue. Now, why do I mention this? Because if you use this unit in its linear phase mode, it sounds great, but it adds latency. So then what's the solution? Well, let me use it in its natural phase mode. But then all of a sudden, it just doesn't sound so great. I have to be honest. It sounded like I'd added like a bit crusher to the top end of my music, which, you know, when you take something and it's like 16-bit or 24-bit, you reduce it to 16, then you reduce it to 12, that kind of sound that happens, that's what I noticed. And for me, that was an absolute deal breaker because most of the time I'm producing. And if I have to get up and bypass it every time I'm producing, this kind of defeats the purpose of a unit like this, because ultimately I want it engaged whilst I'm using my drums, whilst I'm going through my instruments, whilst I'm going through my sounds. Now, this isn't a knock per se on IK Multimedia's product that they've released, because as I said, it is a fantastic product, but it's just something that you have to be aware of. If latency is a massive issue for you, then this thing running in its linear phase mode, as great as it sounds, it does add a latency, which means that when you're playing in your instruments, there's a delay between when you hit the key and when you hear the sound, which for me was a bit of a deal breaker. But if you're a mix engineer, got a little bit of treatment and want to kind of get a little bit of an edge for under like £400, I absolutely recommend this unit to you. I think it will be fantastic in that regard. But if you are a producer, then just a word of caution, there is a latency. I haven't heard anyone mention this issue about the latency. And I was almost a little bit apprehensive to post the video because it's like, do you really want one of your first kind of videos to be given a negative review? But no, this isn't a negative review. This is a positive review. But this is a review that will tell you whether this product is for you or not for you. If you're a music producer, I wouldn't recommend it. But if you are a mix engineer, mastering engineer, someone who wants to just get a little bit extra out of their room without spending 5 to 6 to 7K on the competition, then this unit, I would absolutely recommend it. Yeah. And I think that's all I have to say on the matter. Have a good day.